For 6 years of my life, I was deathly afraid of white BMWs.
Huh?
Like every single time I saw a white BMW, my heart would start beating faster. I would start sweating. My anxiety would go through the roof. I start getting a little tingly feeling, breathing very light. And I would start noticing everything. It felt like my spidey sense just kicked in. It wasn't until about 10 years later that I realized that I was suffering from PTSD because of some abuse that took place when I was a teenager by my father. What's going on, everybody? Pastor Kyle here, and today I just want to continue our series, Some Things Still Hurt, and just talk about how even though we have accomplished a lot, even though time has passed, even though we are far removed from the situation, there are just some things in our lives that still hurt. In Genesis chapter 42, verse 24, we see Joseph coming in contact with his brothers for the first time in 13 years. And the Bible says that when he sees his brothers, as he hears them talk, even though he's got a translator there because he doesn't want to tell them that he is their brother just yet. He's got a translator there for show, but he understands their language. And the Bible says that as he hears them speak, he turns away and starts to cry. If you missed part one of this series, then let me just tell you that scholars tend to say that the reason Joseph cries here is because he sees that his brothers are admitting that they're wrong. But I'd like to suggest that the reason Joseph is crying is because even though he's 13 years later, even though he's got this dope position that he's second in command in all of Egypt, the only person higher than him is Pharaoh, even though he's accomplished a lot, even though he's got a wife and some kids that love him and look up to him, I'd like to just suggest that the reason Joseph is crying when he sees his brothers and hears them talk is because there are some things that still hurt.
Facts.
And listen, I believe that when Joseph sees his brothers, the first thing we talked about was he has to encounter the feeling of abandonment. He has to encounter the feeling of abandonment. But in this part, I want to explore something else, that Joseph is not just experiencing or re-experiencing his abandonment issues, but he's also being triggered. He's also being triggered. What is a trigger? According to the National Center of Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health, they define a trigger as a reminder of past traumatizing events. A reminder of past traumatizing events. They say that after a person experiences abuse, years later, a person can still experience PTSD and be negatively affected, meaning that when I see something that reminds me of what I went through in the past, it triggers me, it causes me to shut down, it presses the button in my body for fight or flight. And listen, I believe that Joseph is experiencing PTSD when he sees his brothers because his brothers are a trigger for him. His brothers are a trigger for him.
Facts.
Well, you might be asking, when in the world did Joseph experience abuse? The Bible says that Joseph gets thrown in a pit by his brothers.
Yep, they sure did try.
For us today, Joseph experiences PTSD because he's been abused by his family members.
Bruh.
He's been abused by his brothers. He's been emotionally abused. He's been physically abused when they threw him into a pit. He's been emotionally abused when they sold him into slavery.
Child, that was shady.
And then just think of all the other abuse that comes with him being a slave. He is probably beaten. He is probably whipped. He's probably punished over and treated like a second-class citizen. And this is all because his brothers abused him.
Shady.
And so when he sees his brothers, I'm sure that it causes PTSD, and he is triggered by the fact that his abusers are staring him in the face.
Facts.
All of us in our lives, if you've experienced some type of abuse, you know what it's like to be triggered. For me, growing up, I after I had experienced abuse by my father, physical, verbal, and mental and emotional abuse by my father, I was triggered every single time I saw a white BMW. White BMW would drive down the street and I would be triggered. PTSD would kick in. My fight or flight instinct would kick in. My adrenaline would pound and my heart would start beating. My eyes would start twitching. I would start breathing heavy. I would start feeling very light and like a tingling situation, almost like some spidey sense kicked in. I was triggered every single time I saw a white BMW because my father drove a white BMW. And every single time he would be at my house, I would see that white BMW BMW sitting outside, and that white BMW meant to me that an abuser was there.
Facts.
And so, listen, I believe that Joseph is sitting in his palace. He's sitting in his spot of authority, but he's also sitting in that spot of authority, encountering his abusers again for the first time in 13 years. And Joseph, even though he's got position, even though he's got power, even though he's got authority, even though he's got wealth and he's got a family, Joseph sees his abusers, and Joseph is re-triggered, meaning it's reminding him of all of the trauma he experienced at their hands. Today, there's somebody who's watching this that knows what it feels like to be triggered. That there are some things that when you see them or you encounter them, or some people you come in contact with, and when you see that thing or you encounter those people or you notice that thing, it re-triggers you. It reminds you of the trauma you experienced in the past. Just because you are in a position, just because you have power, just because you have wealth, just because time has passed, just because you are far removed from that situation in terms of location, it does not mean that that thing still doesn't hurt. If Joseph can be re-triggered, you can be re-triggered. I want you to know that just because you've got position, just because you've got success, just because time has passed, it doesn't mean that that thing goes away. There are just some things that still hurt. I want to just pause here and just kind of talk to anybody here who has experienced a trigger, anybody here who has experienced abuse. One of the things that my therapist told me to do anytime that I get triggered is to recenter myself. Just take some time, close your eyes, and repeat this affirmation to yourself. Right now, I'm safe. Right now, I'm protected. Right now, I'm in control. Right now, I am loved. And nobody right now can do me any harm. Yeah, right now I'm safe. Right now I'm loved. Right now I'm protected. Right now I'm in control. Right now no one can do me any harm. I want to suggest to anybody here who's dealing with triggers like abuse. You are dealing with triggers that are reminding you of the abuse that you've suffered in the past. I want to just ask you and suggest to you that you connect with a therapist. You connect with a therapist. My father was an abusive man. He was an alcoholic. I don't know if he still is to this day. He was abusive to me. He was abusive to my sister. And so he is an abuser. And as a 34-year-old man who is married with a son on the way, I still to this day suffer from triggers. I've got my career going. I've got 2 degrees. I've got a healthy marriage. I got a kid on the way, a healthy baby boy on the way. But even though I got all those things, I still suffer because some things still hurt. And so listen, I just want to tell you today that it's normal for some things to still hurt.